Welcome to today's talk. Hello viewer. In this episode we are going to look at muscles that originate specifically from the scapular bone and then make their insertion onto the humerus bone that's proximal of the shaft or the body of the humerus. There are around 9 muscles that originate from the scapular bone, but 7 of them make their insertion onto what we call the proximal or the body of the humerus. There is an exception of 2 muscles which do not make their insertion onto the humerus, yet they originate, part of their heads originate from the scapular bone. For instance, when you talk about the biceps and then the triceps, whose heads originate from either the supraglenoid tubercle and then the infraglenoid tubercle. So in this, we are going to look about origin, insertion, and then their action. Action, that is during movement of the limb. When I talk about movement, I mean flexion, I mean extension, I mean abduction, I mean adduction. We have internal rotation and then we have external rotation, and a combination of them will give us what we call circumduction. So beginning with, we are going to start with the muscle known as the supraspinatus. So supraspinatus, one of the muscles that originates from the scapula, and where specifically it originates from what we call the supraspinous fossa. The supraspinous fossa. So when it originates from the supraspinous fossa, we make its insertion onto what we call the humerus, but which part specifically? That will be the greater tubercle. The greater tubercle. Greater tubercle. And what's the action of this? This muscle carries out what we call abduction. So it carries out abduction, that is abduction of the arm. Abduction of the arm. Or you can say abduction of the shoulder joint and others. Then the second muscle we shall look at is what we call the infraspinatus. Infraspinatus originates from the infraspinous fossa of the scapula. Infraspinous fossa of the scapula. And where does it insert? It makes its insertion onto what we call the greater tubercle still. The greater tubercle of the humerus. And what's the action of this? It makes its insertion onto the greater tubercle of the humerus, and then during the action, it will call what we call lateral rotation. Lateral rotation. Lateral rotation, and also stabilize the shoulder joint. And stabilize shoulder joint. Shoulder joint. So those are 2 muscles so far, remaining 5. Then another muscle that originates from the scapula is the so-called deltoid. Deltoid is the largest muscle that covers the whole of your shoulder point. So that originates from the spine of the scapula. Spine of scapula. It originates from spine of scapula, then makes its insertion onto the humerus, where specifically that is along the deltoid tuberosity. Deltoid tuberosity. And what's the action of this muscle? We find that this muscle has we call posterior fibers, anterior fibers, and then the lateral fibers. So actions will depend on which fibers are taking place or contracting at a given time. And that means due to the different fibers, we shall have this muscle causing what we call abduction. Abduction along the shoulder joint, or abduction of the arm. Then after abduction, we have fibers that abduction can be caused by what we call the lateral fibers. Lateral fibers, those can help in abduction. And then this muscle too can help in extension, that is extension of the arm, and that is that by posterior fibers. Posterior fibers. It can also help in internal rotation of the arm, and then can help in internal rotation. Can also include internal rotation. If you don't say internal rotation, you can call it medial rotation, depending on which fibers are contracting. Then the other muscle that originates from the scapular bone will be the subscapularis. Subscapularis originates from the subscapular fossa of the scapula. Subscapular fossa. Then makes its insertion onto what we call the lesser tubercle of the humerus. And what's the action of this? This muscle, known as subscapularis, helps to it's important in causing what we call medial rotation. We have medial rotation. So medially, it can rotate or internally rotate the arm. That's medial rotation of arm. Then after that, we have another muscle known as the coracobrachialis. Coracobrachialis originates from the coracoid process of the scapula, and makes its insertion onto the medial side of the humerus. And this muscle coracobrachialis helps to carry out what we call adduction. So it can carry out adduction of the arm. So then after adduction, it is also a weak flexor. So weakly it can flex the arm depending on the conditions. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have another muscle. Two muscles more that originate from the scapula, that is teres minor. Teres minor originates from the lateral. This will be the lateral border of scapula. And where does it insert? Teres minor inserts in the greater tubercle, that is below the point of insertion of the infraspinous. So greater tubercle, we have teres minor. And what's the action of this? Teres minor is also a lateral rotator, so it helps in lateral rotation of the arm, and then it can also help to stabilize the shoulder joint. Then you have the last one, which is known as teres major. Teres major originates from still lateral border, that is below the origin of the teres minor. So lateral border of scapula. And then where does it insert? This inserts on the medial lip. This will be the medial lip of the bicipital groove. Medial lip of the bicipital groove. And what's the action of this? This teres major is important in internal rotation, or we call it medial rotation. Yes, so a medial rotation of the arm. So if you don't say medial rotation, then that can be internal rotation. Thank you for watching this episode. I'll wait for next time when we talk about muscles that originate from the humerus and make their insertion onto the two bones, ulna and then the radius. Thank you.